On the way home after picking up my granddaughter at school, the 7-year-old gripped my hand tightly. "Grandma, hurry. Let's go into the restroom." She pulled me toward a stall and locked the door. I asked her, "What is going on?" She whispered, "Shh. Don't say anything. Look, Grandma." Then she crouched down and looked through the gap under the door. I followed the direction of her gaze and was paralyzed with fear. But before I continue, check if you've subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you are watching us from. We'd love to know how far our reach is. At sunset in Miami, my 7-year-old granddaughter Lily and I were walking back home from school. I had bought her a cherry-flavored lollipop, red like the azalea blossoms in the park. Lily was licking the lollipop, and her innocent smile filled my heart with warmth. But when we walked past an alley that led to the South Beach area, everything changed. Lily stopped abruptly. The lollipop dropped to the sidewalk, melting into a red stain on the concrete. Alarmed, I bent down and asked, "Lily, what is it?" "Sweetie, what's wrong?" But she didn't answer. Her big eyes were wide open, staring fixedly at an invisible spot behind me. Her face went pale, her lips pressed tight, and before I could understand what was happening, she squeezed my hand hard, her little nails digging into my skin. "Grandma, fast!" Her voice trembled, almost pleading. I didn't have time to ask more before Lily pulled me to run. The strength of a terrified 7-year-old girl was impressive. I stumbled, trying to keep up, while my heart began to pound. We crossed the crowded street, but the traffic noise faded in my mind. Lily dragged me to a nearby public restroom, but she didn't stop at the normal stalls. She ran to the end of the hallway where there was an old door leading to a janitor's closet. The dry click of the latch sounded like a warning. Inside, the space was so narrow I could hear my own breathing. The smell of chemicals burned my nose, and darkness enveloped us, except for a thin strip of light filtering under the door. Lily was shaking in my arms, her small body pressed against mine, seeking refuge. She covered her mouth with her hands, trying to stifle her sobs. I hugged her tightly, feeling her heart racing against my chest. "Lily, what is it? Tell me." "Honey," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady, even though an inexplicable unease was constricting my chest. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pointed. "Yes. Look. Grandma." Her voice was barely a thread, trembling, as if speaking louder might summon something terrible. I crouched down and squinted to look through the gap. At first, I only saw the dirty floor and blurred shadows. But then a pair of bright red high-heeled shoes appeared before me, like two lit-up cherries in the grey. They moved slowly, step by step, firm and deliberate. The sound of the heels, clock, clock, echoed on the floor, each strike like a hammer in my chest. My heart was pounding so hard that I feared Lily could hear it. I recognized those shoes. They were Clara's, my daughter-in-law's, the same ones she had worn to my son David's birthday party the week before. Lily hid her face in my lap, her little body rigid like a trapped bird. Through the gap, I saw the shoes stop in front of the first stall. A dull thud sounded as the door opened, then another as it closed, and then she moved to the second, the third. The thuds continued, rhythmic, cold. She was checking them one by one, like a hunter, searching for her prey. My heart sank. I didn't understand what was happening, but Lily's terrified gaze and the presence of those red heels told me it was no coincidence. Suddenly, a voice sounded sweet but chilling. Lily, sweetheart. Are you in here? It was Clara's voice. I had heard it hundreds of times, calling Lily to dinner, laughing with customers at the bakery, talking tenderly to David. Lily flinched in my arms, hugging me tighter as if she wanted to disappear inside me. I stroked her hair, trying to calm her, but I was trembling, too. The footsteps approached until they were right in front of the door of the room where we were hiding. The shadow of the heels projected under the door, covering the thin line of light, the only connection we had left with the outside world. I held my breath, feeling the air in my lungs run out. The steps stopped. Silence. A thick, terrifying silence, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for something to explode. Suddenly, a phone ringing broke the stillness with a sharp sound. I heard Clara mutter something in annoyance. The heels sounded again, moving away toward the exit. The clock grew fainter until it disappeared. Even so, I didn't dare to breathe heavily, fearing it was a trap. Lily was still clinging to me, her body shaking. And amidst that trembling, I couldn't help but remember the days when everything began. I am Martha Evans, 62 years old and a widow. I live in Miami, where the sound of the waves and the smell of toasted bread mark the rhythm of life. The bakery, Seaside Sweets, tucked away in the Art Deco district, is not just my workplace, but also the home of my heart. Every morning before the sun rises, I get up and with my hands rough from flour and years, I begin to knead and bake fresh croissants and bagels. This bakery is everything I have. The place where I raised my only son, David, alone after my husband died in a storm at sea almost 3 decades ago. David was always a quiet and kind young man. From a young age, he ran around the bakery, helped me clean the tables, arrange the bread on the shelves, or carry the heavy sacks of flour. He wasn't like the other boys in Miami, who preferred to spend time at the beach, drinking soda and laughing loudly. He preferred to stay in the bakery, reading or fixing the old oven. And then Clara Smith appeared like a new breeze that entered our lives. She was a regular customer, a young architect who had just moved from Atlanta. Clara always came in smiling, her shiny black hair pulled back in a high ponytail, and her eyes sparkling like the sun reflecting on the sea. "Mrs. Evans, your bread is the best in the city," she used to say with a voice sweet as honey. I would smile and tell her she was exaggerating, but inside I felt comforted. Clara had that way of making others feel seen, valued, and I noticed her eyes sparkled even more when she talked to David. David, who had always been reserved and shy, began to change. He laughed more and even shaved more carefully on days he knew Clara would stop by the bakery. I saw him in front of the mirror adjusting his shirt, and I knew his heart had awakened. A year later, they got married. The wedding was held on the beach. Simple but warm. I stood amidst the sound of the waves and the laughter with tears falling silently. Not of sadness, but of happiness. I thought that finally David had found his partner and that our small family was complete. Clara brought Lily, her 7-year-old daughter, from a previous marriage. The girl's father, Mark, had died in an accident. She only mentioned it once, and I didn't want to ask more. Lily was a beautiful girl with big round eyes and slightly curly hair. The first time she saw me, she handed me a drawing of a red azalea flower. "This is for you." "Grandma," she murmured. Her cheeks flushed. My heart melted. Since then, I loved her like my own granddaughter, always keeping a small croissant in my pocket to make her smile. At first, our life seemed like a dream. Clara was a wife, and she wasn't perfect. She cooked delicious meals. The smell of homemade turkey pot pie filled the entire apartment above the bakery. She redecorated the house, changed the curtains, placed plants on the balcony, and transformed my small kitchen into an organized and bright space. But I gave one to Lily, smiling. "This is for you." But Clara, who was in the kitchen, took the bread from the girl's hands and replaced it with a plate of perfectly sliced fruit. "Too much sugar isn't good for her, Mom," she said in a soft but firm voice. Lily lowered her head without saying anything, although her eyes looked at me as if asking for forgiveness. I started paying attention to Lily's gaze. She watched her mother, not with affection, but with a strange caution, as if she feared doing something wrong. One night during dinner, Lily accidentally spilled a glass of sweet iced tea. The glass broke on the floor, and the girl turned pale, her hands trembling. Sorry, Mom, she stammered while picking up the pieces. Clara didn't scold her. She just smiled. It's okay, honey. Lily cleaned up in silence, head bowed, as if afraid of being punished for a simple mistake. Another time, I sewed Lily a rag doll. When I gave it to her, her eyes shone and she hugged it tightly. It's beautiful, Grandma, she whispered. But a few days later, while cleaning her room, I found the doll hidden under the bed, as if she was afraid someone would discover it. My suspicions turned into a dark cloud one afternoon when I returned home earlier because I had forgotten my handkerchief. I went up the stairs slowly, not wanting to interrupt anyone. As I passed Lily's room, I heard Clara's voice. Icy. What did I promise you, huh? Never lie to me. I know everything. There was no sweetness, not a trace of tenderness. I froze, my heart pounding. I pushed the door open, trying to seem calm. I'm back, I said, my voice shaky. Clara turned around immediately. Her perfect smile returned as if a switch had been flipped. Oh, you're back, Mom. Lily and I were playing storytelling, she said in a kind tone, as if nothing had happened. But Lily stepped back, and her eyes looked at me pleadingly, begging me not to leave. I smiled back, but inside I knew that Clara's was just a mask. Behind it was something that wasn't right. And now, after the sound of Clara's heels faded in the distance in the small janitor's closet, I waited 2 more minutes, my ear tuned to any noise. Outside, I only heard the murmur of the waves mixed with the distant shouts of someone selling cold sodas. There were no more footsteps, nor Clara's sweet and terrifying voice. I opened the door carefully, just enough to let in a thread of light. Through the gap, I saw that the restroom was completely empty. I held Lily up to walk out. Her legs were so weak that she practically leaned entirely on me. As I left that suffocating space and breathed the salty sea air, I thought I would feel relief. But it wasn't so. Lily began to tremble uncontrollably, as if the fear contained for so long had finally been released. I led her to a stone bench under a sea almond tree overlooking South Beach. I bought a bottle of water from a nearby street vendor, gave it to her, and spoke softly. Take a sip, honey. Then tell Grandma what happened. Lily held the bottle tightly, but didn't drink. She just shook her head, hugging herself as if she wanted to become invisible. I sat down next to her, put my hand on her shoulder, and tried to keep my voice calm. It's okay, Lily. It's just you and me here. You can tell me anything. But she remained silent, her big eyes full of tears, looking at her sand-covered sandals. Then, like a breaking dam, Lily burst into tears. She threw herself into my arms, hiding her face in my chest while her tears soaked my blouse. I'm so scared. Grandma! She sobbed in a tiny broken voice. Mom. Mom follows me. Those words pierced my heart like a knife. I hugged Lily tightly, trying to contain the anger that was beginning to boil inside me. Lily, tell me, what does your mom do that scares you so much? I asked, my voice trembling. Although I tried to keep calm, Lily took a deep breath, trying to control her sobs. Then she began to speak in short, fragmented sentences, but full of truth. Mum doesn't just wait for me at the school gate, she said, looking toward the sea. Sometimes she sits at the coffee shop across the street. Sometimes she asks my friend Matthew what I ate or what I played with. I don't want her to know, but she always knows. I listened, feeling my heart contract. Lily continued speaking, her voice trembling even more. Yesterday, Matthew told me that a very nice lady asked him about me, and he described her just like Mom. Grandma. She was wearing her blue blouse and the red shoes. Lily stopped, hugging me tighter. Mum said that if I told anyone, even Dad, David, or you, she would get very sad, that she would have to take me somewhere very far away. Her words left me cold. I hugged her tighter while rage and sadness mixed in my chest. Rage because Clara had made the girl live with this. I won't let your mum take you anywhere, I whispered firmly, although my mind was full of questions. What was Clara hiding? Why was she controlling Lily so much? If this story has touched you, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with others. It helps me grow and reach more people. On the way to the bakery, I didn't let go of Lily's hand for a second. Her small hands were icy, even though the afternoon was still warm. I looked around constantly, observing every passing car, especially the white ones, like the one Clara usually drove. Every engine noise, every shadow that moved, made me flinch. The sunset in Miami used to be beautiful, with the sky dyed orange and red like a promise of peace. But that afternoon, those colors only seemed like a warning to me. Something was about to change. That night, when Lily was already asleep, I waited for David to return from delivering the cakes to a hotel near the beach. When he came in, I saw a tired but satisfied smile on his face. Lots of customers today. Mom, he said, taking off his flower-covered shoes and collapsing onto the sofa. I nodded, forcing a smile. I knew I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I had to tell him what had happened that afternoon. David, I need to talk to you. I began carefully. He looked up, curious, but calm. I took a deep breath and told him everything. How Lily had dragged me to the janitor's closet in the restroom. The terrified look in her eyes, Clara's red heels, and the girl's trembling words, saying her mother was following her. I told him how Lily was shaking about her phrases that Clara always knew everything, and that she would take her far away if she dared to tell anyone. David listened, but his expression changed little by little. From concern, it turned to doubt, and finally to slight annoyance. When I finished speaking, he sighed, put a hand on my shoulder, and said in a low but firm voice, "Mum, you're overthinking it. Clara is just very worried about Lily. You know how she lost Mark. She's afraid of losing her daughter, too, of not being able to protect her." His words fell on me like a bucket of cold water. I looked him in the eyes, seeking a bit of empathy, but only found protectiveness. The girl was so scared she dropped her lollipop. She was shaking in my arms. That's not normal concern, I insisted. Just at that moment, the bedroom door opened. Clara came out dressed in cream-colored silk pajamas, her black hair loose, falling over her shoulders. She stood there silent, her eyes wide open as if she had heard everything. My heart sank. I didn't know how long she had been standing there, but her gaze, without anger, without defense, full of tears, caught me by surprise. She approached David, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. Mom, I didn't mean to scare Lily." She lowered her head, interlacing her hands. "It's just that since Mark, I'm afraid of losing her, of not being a good mother." She looked up and faced me, her eyes full of pain. "I just want to do it right, Mum. I'm afraid of failing." Her words, her tone so fragile, made me doubt. For an instant, I almost wanted to believe her. But the image of Lily trembling in the janitor's closet, her eyes full of terror, returned to my mind, and I knew I couldn't let compassion sway me. However, David was already on the other side. He stood up, hugged Clara, and patted her back as if consoling a child. "It's okay. Love," he whispered. Then he looked at me with a hint of reproach in his gaze. "Mum, I know you're worried about Lily, but Clara just wants the best for her." I stood there motionless, and the conversation ended just like that. A few days later, during breakfast, Clara announced that she had hired a company to install a security system in the bakery and the apartment. "It's to prevent break-ins and keep the family safe," she said with a gentle but calculated smile. I nodded without saying anything, but a sense of unease began to grow inside me. One afternoon, while cleaning the bread shelves, I discovered a tiny, almost invisible camera placed in the corner of the living room, pointing directly at the common area. Another was in the hallway where Lily and I used to play. The blinking red light was like empty eyes. I observed that Clara's control became increasingly subtle. One day, she placed a leather-bound notebook on the table, full of pages written in neat handwriting. "This is the family schedule," she announced enthusiastically. "I think it will help us be more organized and united." In that notebook, she had written down everything: the time I went to the farmer's market, the time David made deliveries, the time Lily went to her ballet classes. She had even noted when I usually took my nap and what time I checked the oven. "Clara, don't you think this is a bit too much?" I tried to tell her. But she just smiled. "Oh, Mom, it's just more practical. I just want everything to be clear." One afternoon, I arrived 10 minutes late. When we entered the house, Clara was already at the door, arms crossed, and her perfect smile. "Everything okay?" "Mom?" she asked with a sweet voice, but without warmth. I called the teacher, and she said you hadn't arrived yet. I got worried. I tried to stay calm and explained that the oven had broken down, but her gaze didn't leave me, evaluating every word I said. Lily hid behind me, not daring to lift her head. My house no longer felt like a home, but a stage, and Clara was the director. Every gesture, every word was under observation. I started noticing small details, how she always wiped the fingerprints from the doorknobs as if wanting to erase any trace of error. How she organized the spice jars in alphabetical order without a single deviation. Her perfection was no longer admirable. It was a silent weapon, a constant warning that I had to be careful, that Lily had to be careful. That night, around 2:00 the morning, the neighborhood was completely silent. Only the distant back and forth of the waves and the faint clacking of the ceiling fan spinning slowly could be heard. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. The image of Lily's terrified eyes in that public restroom, Clara's fake smile and the cameras blinking in the dark wouldn't leave me alone. Unable to bear it anymore, I sat up in bed, my bare feet touching the cold floor. I decided to go down to the kitchen for a glass of water, hoping that something so simple would calm me. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the faint moonlight filtering through the window, drawing shadows on the wall. As I passed the main bathroom, a sharp crash froze my blood. Crash. The sound of something breaking rang out with a force that was not accidental. It wasn't the noise of a cup falling. A yellowish light filtered through the gap, spilling onto the tiles like a dangerous invitation. Inside, I heard agitated, broken breathing like someone who had just run a long distance. I took a deep breath, trying to make my own breath as silent as possible, and advanced cautiously. My trembling hand touched the door, and I pushed it slowly, just enough to look inside. Clara was standing with her back to me, facing the large wall mirror. The white light of the fluorescent bulb projected a long, distorted shadow onto the floor. In the white porcelain sink, fragments of a hand mirror shone like tiny abandoned diamonds. A few drops of dark blood fell from her right hand, spreading over the porcelain like abstract stains of a disturbing painting. Clara seemed not to notice the wound. She remained motionless, her eyes wide open, staring fixedly at her reflection in the large mirror. That gaze was empty, lifeless, as if talking to an unknown version of herself. Then she began to murmur in a voice so low that I had to strain to hear. "It wasn't my intention. I told you it wasn't my intention." Her voice trembled, as if trying to convince someone or convince herself. She held her head with her good hand. Her body swayed slightly as if caught in a delirium. I stayed still, my heart pounding so hard that I feared she could hear it. Suddenly, her voice became clearer, more desperate. "He was the one who fell. He slipped. I just pushed his hand away." Those words chilled me. I felt a coldness run through my body as if someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on me. He... Who was she talking about? The image of Mark, Clara's ex-husband, appeared in my mind. But no, it couldn't be. The report said it had been an accident. Or was there something I didn't know? Fear and doubt mixed inside me, making me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Unable to contain myself, I asked in a trembling voice, "Clara, who are you talking about?" My voice broke the silence, and Clara jumped. She turned around sharply. Her eyes went from empty to completely terrified when she saw me. For a second, I saw pure panic in her gaze, like a cornered animal. But immediately, she blinked, and a forced, twisted smile appeared on her lips. "Mom, you scared me." she said, trying to sound calm, but her voice sounded strange, dry in the middle of that silence. I just had a nightmare. A horrible dream. Clara quickly wrapped her bloody hand in a towel. Avoiding my gaze, she hurried past me, murmuring over and over, "It was just a dream. Mom." But I knew it wasn't a dream. The way she had said he fell only wasn't the way of someone who had just woken up scared. It was the voice of someone trying to convince herself of a lie, of someone hiding a terrible truth. That very night, I decided I couldn't stand idly by. I had to find out who he was. The next morning, when the sunrise was just beginning to illuminate the sky, I was already in the kitchen with a cup of coffee in my hands. When David and Clara came down for breakfast, I tried to maintain a serene tone and told them I had to visit a sick cousin in a small town near Sarasota and that I would probably return late. Clara smiled and nodded. "Take care. Mom, if you need anything, call me." Her smile, as always, perfect but cold. David only looked up from the newspaper to nod. In reality, I didn't go to Sarasota. I went straight to a small cafe in the historic district, where the cobblestone streets and blooming azaleas created a calm atmosphere far from Clara's control. I chose a secluded corner where none of her cameras could see me. There I met with George Taylor, my late husband's best friend, a retired police chief from Atlanta. He was a man I trusted completely, someone who had shared nights of bourbon and conversations about the sea with my husband under the moonlight. George sat across from me. His wrinkled face showed the years, but his eyes were still as sharp as when he worked. I told him everything, Lily's terrified eyes, the red heels in the public restroom, the chilling scene in the bathroom the night before. I handed him an envelope with some dollars. Not much, but enough to ask him to use his experience to investigate Clara Smith and her ex-husband Mark. I stayed later in the nearby park, pretending to read an old book, although my eyes couldn't leave the phone. Every sound, every notification, every bus engine that passed made my heart race. A few hours later, the phone vibrated. It was George. His voice sounded serious, firm. "Martha, I found him. Mark Mendoza. He died 2 years ago. His last address was in a middle-class neighborhood in a suburb of Atlanta. The official report says, domestic accident. Fall down the stairs. Too fast." Then he sent me an address by text message along with a warning. "Be careful, Martha. Something's not right." Those words left a weight on my chest as if I had just touched an icy secret. Without thinking twice, I took the first bus to Atlanta. The trip lasted several hours. The scenery outside the window changed from the green palm trees by the sea to the arid hills of the plateau. I leaned back in the seat, my hands clutching my old cloth purse, while a single question spun in my head. What really happened on those stairs? The image of Clara in front of the mirror, murmuring, "He fell only prophet," repeated over and over like a stuck film. I tried to imagine Mark, the man Clara hardly ever talked about, beyond mentioning that he had died in an accident. But the tone of panic in her voice the night before, the blood in the sink, and Lily's terrified gaze, all told me that it had been something much more terrible than a simple accident. Upon arriving at the suburb of Atlanta, I looked for the address George had sent me. It was a 2-story house, painted light blue, with a white fence and small cactus pots in front of the yard. But another family lived there now, a young couple with children whose laughter could be heard from the windows. I stood in front of the gate, feeling lost and confused. What should I do? Knock on the door and ask about someone who lived there 2 years ago? I was about to leave when an older woman who was watering some azaleas in the neighboring house looked at me with curiosity. She was wearing a somewhat worn floral dress and had her white hair pulled back in a low bun. I gathered my courage, approached her, and told her I was a distant relative of Clara's family. "I just want to know a little more about her life before," I said, trying to sound natural, although my heart was pounding. The woman, whose name was Eleanor, watched me for a moment as if trying to decide if she could trust me. Then she smiled, invited me into her patio, and offered me a glass of fresh lemonade. "Sit down, dear." After a few minutes of light chat about the weather and the neighborhood, she began to talk. "Clara. Yes, a very pretty girl, but she always seemed tense. Mrs. Eleanor said, lowering her voice as if afraid someone might hear. Her husband Mark was a good man. He always brought donuts for the neighborhood kids and smiled all the time. She told me that their life looked perfect from the outside. A nice house. Lily always well dressed and Clara taking care of every detail. But the walls were thin, and she often heard them arguing. Clara was obsessed with being a perfect mother. Mrs. Eleanor said, looking into the distance. She controlled everything that had to do with Lily. The food, the clothes, even her friends. Once I saw her standing outside the school, watching the girl play from afar, without blinking. Then she stopped, looking around as if afraid someone was listening. The night he died, she lowered her voice even more, almost to a whisper. They argued very loudly. The whole neighborhood heard them. Mark was shouting that he couldn't take it anymore, that she wasn't right in the head, and that he was going to file for divorce to get custody of Lily. I felt my throat dry and squeezed the glass of lemonade tightly. "Mrs. Evans," Eleanor continued. "Mark had talked to my son, who is a lawyer, about gathering evidence that Clara was unfit to care for her daughter. He was afraid that she would do something inappropriate. After the shouting, there was a very loud thump," she recounted, and her eyes darkened. And then silence. A horrible silence. The next morning, the police arrived. They said it was an accident, that Mark fell down the stairs. But, she paused, looking directly at me. "Nobody believed it was an accident, Mom. But nobody dared to say anything. Clara's look after that." It was scary. Her words sent a chill down my spine as if a blast of icy wind had cut through the afternoon heat. I thanked Mrs. Eleanor, my hands trembling as I set the glass on the table. On the bus back to Miami, I looked out the window without really seeing anything, only images. Mrs. Eleanor's words, Clara's terrified whispers in the bathroom, and Lily's scared eyes intertwined, forming a frightening picture. I returned to Miami when the sky was already beginning to darken. As I entered the living room, I saw Clara sitting on the sofa reading a story to Lily. The warm light of the lamp enveloped them like a perfect painting of mother and daughter. Lily was snuggled against her, her big eyes fixed on the book. Clara looked up and smiled sweetly at me. "You're back, Mom. How was the visit with your cousin?" That smile, which had once seemed warm to me, now made me shudder. It was too perfect, too measured, like a mask without cracks. I nodded and replied briefly, "All good. Thank you." I had to wait until Lily fell asleep, until David returned from the bakery, until I found a moment to speak with my son alone. I sat in the living room with a cup of cold tea in my hands, trying to organize the chaos of my thoughts. The image of Clara in front of the broken mirror, her trembling voice, and Mrs. Eleanor's account mixed in my mind like a whirlwind dragging me to the center. I had to talk to David. But how could I make him believe me? How could I destroy my son's faith in the woman he loved without destroying our family at the same time? That night, after we closed the bakery, David and I were in the kitchen going over the accounts for the month. That night, that was our place. The space that had always been for mother and son, where he did his homework as a child, where I taught him to knead and roll out dough. Now, under the dim light, David looked tired, but there was a slight satisfaction on his face as he saw the numbers in order. I closed the kitchen door. The dry sound of the lock was like a declaration. This conversation should not be interrupted. David, I need to talk to you, I began in a quiet but firm voice, although my heart was pounding. David looked up and smiled slightly. What is it? Mom, I told him that Mark wanted to divorce and keep custody of Lily because he feared Clara was not mentally well. And I recounted that fateful night. The crash, the subsequent silence, and how no one in the neighborhood had believed it was an accident. David listened, but his expression changed little by little. First it was surprise, then doubt. Mom, those are just neighbor gossip, he said with a somewhat annoyed tone. You know how they are. They love inventing stories. I looked him directly in the eyes, trying to keep